UK. It's not saying anything. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, so then we can begin. Okay, and I need to put this up here. So this is module 5, and I've got someone coming in. This is module 5, and what we're going to talk about tonight is person-centered approaches in health and social care. Now, this is again about the values that you need to have in all of the interactions when you're dealing with clients or patients. So we're going to dig into what exactly does this term mean, because you're going to find it quite a lot as you are in your health or social care journey. So again, what are we here to do? The whole purpose of this diploma is to give you the underpinning knowledge, the understanding and skills for this career in health and social care. Okay, a support worker, senior support worker, or care assistant. Now, it's important that we remember why are we doing this, because sometimes when we do courses and we don't go back to the basics of what is the purpose of this course, it can sometimes feel like what we're learning is a lot of facts, a lot of information, but we're not quite sure how it all fits together and what's the purpose. So it's really important to keep in mind, what are we trying to achieve? So the learning outcomes for today are, firstly, we're going to understand what person-centered approaches are and how they utilize, how are they actually put into practice in health and social care. What would it look like? What would we understand it to be if we were talking about person-centered approaches? And we're going to understand the ways of working in a person-centered way. So it's not just an empty phrase. It's really about everything we do and how it gives us a certain perspective and focus in the way we do things. Okay, so a lot of the time it can feel sometimes as if we use phrases or terms that don't have any real meaning in the real world. You know, they're not what we're going to be actually doing. But person-centered approaches underpin everything. So when you have this as your lens or the framework in which you think about your work, then it will make you look and do things in a certain way. And we're going to think about consent. And consent is really, really important. So we need to know firstly what consent is, and then what do we need to do to make sure we've achieved it, or that we are nurturing consent. Because it's very, very different from previously in healthcare. Patients would have things done to them, or, you know, people who were being cared for would have things done to them, and it didn't really matter if they wanted that to happen or not. So now with everything we do, we have to make sure that the person that we're providing the service to is okay with what we're about to do. And then if we think about this person-centered way of working, part of that is about making sure that the people that we care for are actually involved in their care and in their decision making. So how do we make sure that we can promote and we can encourage and we can nurture their active participation? Because remember, often when we're dealing with clients in a health or social care setting, we can be working with people who are incredibly vulnerable or have limited communication. So we still need to think about how do we find the methods or the means in order to get them to be able to say, I was part of this decision-making process. So let's understand person-centered approaches. So we're going to define it first. So we want to know really what are the values that underpin this approach. What is it that we're talking about when we talk about person-centered perspectives, but also what are the ethics that underline that? Then how would that play out in health and social care practice? So this isn't a theory that stays on paper. This is very much about a perspective and a value basis that we then put into practice in everything that we do. And how is it that we use it in care plans? How are they central when we're applying these values? How do we make sure that the care plan is actually being used in a way that makes sure these values are now being put out into the real world? And we're going to describe the factors that contribute to the well-being of individuals. So it's important to know what sort of things do we need to be thinking about when we are thinking about well-being. How do we understand well-being, and what are the sorts of things that impact on our clients or our patients' well-being? Okay, so the guiding principle. Guiding principle is to put the interest of the individual receiving care at the center of everything we do. So what does that mean? Because that seems pretty complicated. What it actually says that when we are providing care, we need to almost think we are the person that we're providing care for. So we need to understand what are their beliefs, what are their preferences, what are their feelings, do they like this, don't they like this? And when we put their interests, that person's interest as the central point, then all of the other decisions that we make fall off of that. They all come from that. So, if we know somebody has a particular religion, and we know that that means they can only eat certain types of foods, or they cannot eat certain types of foods, then we make sure that what we do within the care that we provide is mindful of that, and that's at the center of all of the planning we do. Now, previously, what would happen is somebody would go into a care situation or a hospital situation, and it was a case of you take what you're given, okay? No sense of flexibility or attempting to take that person's interests, beliefs, attitudes into account when we were designing care. Now, remember when we talked about equality and inclusion, we now know that everybody has the right to be included within the whole of their care planning, and that they can't be discriminated against based on any kind of personal or interpersonal factor. So we go from those very, very big principles to now these values. And these values, this principle here, is going to be an internal dialogue you have all of the time, asking yourself, what is the person I care for's needs, interests, preferences? So some things that you can do won't be possible for this individual. Okay, so we're going to have to pay into consideration individuality. People are as different as grains of sand on the beach. They have different interests, they have different needs, they have different preferences. So we need to be able to see each person that we care for as a totality of themselves. So even though we maybe provide fairly similar care to lots of people, it's not exactly the same. Okay, we do not have a system of one size fits all, because each and every one of us has different parts. So whether it be our gender, whether it be our religion, whether it be our ethnicity, whether it be our sexuality, or maybe it's just that we come from different parts of the country, so we have different outlooks. All of those things make us individual, and as carers, we need to be aware of that. We really need to be encouraging independence. Even though someone is vulnerable and they are maybe feeling, that they're losing capacity. So especially, for example, someone in the early stages of dementia, there's lots of things that they may be not as able to do, but we're always trying to promote independence as much as possible for that person. So we really don't want to be kind of rushing in, taking over and doing everything. If you ever have the chance of watching physiotherapists and occupational therapists who work in hospitals, when they're in an acute setting, you'll see that they're very, very determined on this. So while it may feel like we see someone in distress and we want to rush in and help, the occupational therapist and the physiotherapist will create plans which say exactly how much help we can give. So say somebody's had a fall and they've broken their hip, and we want to help them go to the toilet. The occupational therapist and the physiotherapist will give us a timeline to say, okay, by at this point, this person needs to be going to the toilet independently. And that's always within any care or health setting. We're trying to maintain that and promote that person having as much independence in everything they do. We have to be incredibly aware of privacy, and privacy is our complete right for people to have privacy in their own physicality, in some of the things that they may want to share or don't want to share, that their information is confidential, so we can't go out and tell other people. And privacy, especially when it becomes for physical care, can be very a sensitive issue, because if we have to clean people, if we have to bathe people, if we have to change their clothes, that's a high degree of intimacy, and for some people that's very, very invasive. So we have to be mindful that if that person wants to get themselves changed in a private space, then that they that's what we're going to encourage. Partnership. So we're making sure that everybody knows what we're going to be doing, and we are partnered not only with our colleagues but with the person we care for. So they are not an object that we do something to. What we're trying to achieve is working with. Okay, and that means that they are our partners, because really, when it comes to health and social care, it's the other person's life. We're just having to provide support services or support mechanisms for them to be able to live their life. So we've actually been given an invitation to join them in their life journey. It's not about us taking over. We have to provide choice. We have to allow people to even make choices that we may not agree with, or choices that we think aren't really, in their best interest. But we have to allow people to do that, because again, we're coming from that individual person. It's their life. They have autonomy, which means they're allowed to make their own choices, and they have independence. So that means they can even make mistakes. Some people in mental health, you may have a client who has been given a medication, but they don't choose to take it because they don't like how it makes them feel. Now, we can encourage and we can definitely talk about the benefits of it, but we can't make them do it, because again, it's their choice. And we have to maintain dignity, even when someone is incredibly vulnerable, when they are at their lowest. They are still a human being, and they're, probably someone's mum or dad or brother or sister or wife or husband or child. And that means we have to treat them with respect and allow them to maintain their dignity, even if where they are at that time is maybe, not a very pleasant place in their life. And we have to respect them. So again, that comes to choice. When somebody makes a choice that we maybe don't agree with, for whatever reason, we have to respect that choice. We have to say, okay, this person is an adult, this person is in control of their own life, and we have to respect those decisions. We cannot put pressure on. And they have rights. So they have rights to be, again, for equality. They have rights to be able to make choices in their life. They have rights to be included. All of these things mean that these aren't just, they're not just like vague ideas. They are the rights these people, everyone has in law. Now, taking all of these together, okay, all of these ideas, all of these values, we are talking about person-centered values, okay? So all of them together are what we have in the back of our head at all times about every decision we make when we are interacting with somebody. Okay, so how do they underpin the health and social care practice? So how do we apply them in all of the aspects? Well, vulnerable individuals, we have to make sure that vulnerable individuals are treated not just as somebody that we do things to, but that they are still active participants. So we need to make sure that when we're dealing with somebody who maybe has some sort of cognitive incapacity, that doesn't mean that their rights or that the values that we hold disappear. It actually means we have to put more effort in. We have to make even more effort to be able to communicate to them, to ensure that they have choice, and to give them the best opportunity they can have to participate. Now, when you're working in social care or health, and you've got many, many things you have to do. So, you've been told you've got to go make the beds, you've got to go and get the meals out, you've got to make sure so-and-so is being bathed, you've got to go and, sort out the laundry. There'll be a lot of things that you have to do, and you may be writing up reports. It's very easy to kind of forget about the person-centered approach, because what we want to do is we want to get through what we have to do today. And when we're working with vulnerable individuals who don't have maybe the same vocal resistance as more able individuals or patients would do, it's easy for us to forget and just kind of almost see them as if we're on a conveyor belt as we go through the tasks we need to do, and that they just have to go along with the conveyor belt. That's a very, very dangerous road to go down, because what happens is you're then not seeing the people that you're caring for as people. So be very, very mindful and cautious of that. Who are we talking about? People with learning disabilities, people with physical disabilities, mental ill health. So, if you work with learning disabilities, you'll probably have to do quite a lot of physical care. You'll have to deal with, butt bathing. You'll have to deal with toileting. There's a whole range of activities that you may have to take responsibility for, but you still have to be able to meet the person as a person. Okay? The same with physical disabilities or post-surgery, even if you're working as, if you're going to become a nursing assistant, something like that. physical disabilities, depending on the type of disability that the person has. There can be a lot of issues to do with sensitivities about how other people see them, things they are able to do, for example, feeding themselves. You may see somebody who you think needs help to feed themselves, but in actual fact, if you go to help them, they end up tipping a bowl of food over your head, okay? Because what can be being told is actually, it might not be how you do it, but it's how I do it, and I have the right to do it. So it's very much about, when you're working with vulnerable individuals, you have to meet them where they are and try not to jump in and kind of, rescue everybody. And obviously older adults and children. Now, children are often forgotten because we just kind of go, oh, and children. But children have the right to participate in all of the decisions that are made for them. They have the right to be given as much information as that they can cope with and that they can understand. So it has to be made at a level that they're able to deal with. There are definitely certain techniques that we need to use when we're trying to engage children, making decisions and being involved in their care. And a lot of it is just about time and patience. Children will get bored easily and they'll wander off, and they'll go, oh no, I had enough, and they want to leave. But that's okay, because again, we're on their time scale. It's not on ours. So how do we apply it? Okay, so we need to start with the thinking skills. We need to have this as just literally what's in the back of our head at all times. It's not something that we go, I'm going to do all my tasks today. Oh, and yeah, by the way, I better think person-centered. Okay, that's not how it works. It's always person-centered. And how do I do my tasks from this perspective? So we've got to think about communication. Remember, we talked about different forms of communication. When somebody struggles with that, we need to be agile enough. We need to be adaptable enough to be able to try different methods. If we are going to actively encourage someone to take part as an active participant in their health, then we need to make sure that we give them the best opportunity. So if somebody has an issue with communication, so maybe they have, they're non-verbal, for example, it's our duty to go and find out, how do we bridge the gap? We need to think about their lifestyle planning. So when we're thinking about person-centered approaches, it's not just going to be, okay, I'm going to take over, this part of bathing and cleaning the house. It's also got to be, how does the care that I'm providing, and how is the package that's around this person, how is it helping that individual to participate in every aspect of their life? So we try to see in a much more holistic way, so that when we're thinking about the services we provide, we make sure that we are looking at everything that as it fits together. Now, obviously, that's the best case scenario. And sometimes, we're slightly limited in that. But again, when we're thinking about a person, no person exists in one context. Okay, they are not just the person who's in a wheelchair. They're also maybe the person who is in a wheelchair who has children. The person who's in a wheelchair that has children and is a volunteer in a local centre. Okay, so suddenly you start to see, okay, this person isn't just physical disability. There are a whole range of other things. And once we start looking at the person in all of the contexts they exist in, then we start to be truly able to say this is person-centered. And we have to think about the reviews. So we have to go back and we have to make sure that, people change. So if we say, oh, okay, we've planned it, and that's fine, we need to go back and check, because people are dynamic, and situations don't stay the same. So if we think we have a piece of information that will last forever, then we could be missing vital information which is really important to that individual. We need to enable the decision making, and this is important about inclusion, because everyone has the right to be included and take part in every aspect of their life, and especially in these situations, decisions about health and social care. These go back to, again, they have these rights. We want to encourage independence, we want to encourage choice and inclusion. So it's not a case of saying, oh, by the way, Mr. So-and-so, this is how it is, and that's all there is to it. You have to be able to say, okay, look, this is what we suggest as a care package. That, this particular place would be the best place for mum or dad, but however, there are these other options. So we're always trying to provide options for people in order to make choice. Okay, so they don't feel like they're being funneled. And the values of individuality. Okay, we're going to have to think about what are the values that underpin decision making. That's whether that's what the person's values are, what our values are, because our values might even be in conflict with the person that we're working with. But in this context, that person's values override ours. We're almost like we have to kind of go, okay, this person, maybe is a different religion to me, or this person has a different cultural attitude to me, or a different sexuality to me, or is a different race from me, or different language from mine. But this isn't my life that I'm making decisions on. This is this person's life. They have to be the one making the decisions. And that can be tough. It can be tough. And we have to make sure that we be mindful. Not everybody has come out of a factory where we've cloned everyone. Everyone comes out slightly different needs, different education, different insight, different, whatever. Even people within the same religion will have different interpretations of the same religion. Okay, so we can't even make assumptions based on, okay, this person has this faith, and person, Mr. Brown has this faith, and Mr. Green has this faith, and it's the same faith, so they must want the same things. We know that that's not the case, so we have to go down to the individual and we have to ask. And again, choice, privacy, and dignity. Choice is all the way through this, okay? Choice to be in order to be included, choice to be able to make the most daily decisions. And the reason that decisions and choice are really so important is because when a person is in a care situation and they're vulnerable, they have the sensation that their sense of self has been taken away, that other people are now making all the decisions about them. Now, if you have somebody who, let's say someone has been in a car crash and they've had a head injury, and this person was, highly independent, had a really good job, was used to making very big decisions in business, and now suddenly they're in this other world where people are making all the decisions for them. That alone is a really scary sensation, because their sensation of losing control is very, very high. So in order for us to be able to help them transition through that shock, we need to make sure that we're still in conversation, giving choices. And again, diversity, culture, values. We're talking about, we go back to, sexuality, gender, religion, able-bodied, visual impairment, mental illness, a whole range of differences that define us. And we remember we cannot discriminate based on these. So for example, if you are dealing with like for example, I would be working with a woman and I'm doing clinical work with a woman. Now, even though she may be in a totality a woman, her ideas, where she is in her life at say 35 with 2 small children, is not the same as a woman of 65, what she's thinking about. Okay, so we have to be mindful that life stage is also going to impact on what's important at what point. Okay, so planning the individual plan. So we've got these values, we've got these perspectives and lenses, these things that we need to be using as at every part of the decision making process and the planning process. But then what we have to do is we have to kind of put it down. So when we're doing it, how do we get there? Well, the first thing we've got to do is we have to start to negotiate with our clients. We have to start to unpick what it is that they like, what they don't like, what's acceptable to them, what's not acceptable to them. So I worked in severe learning disability for, a number of years, and a lot of my clients were non-verbal. They couldn't communicate using language, but they were very, very able to participate by non-verbal means. Now, when I first began working with them, I was, I wasn't very good at it, to be honest. I wasn't very good at paying attention. I would have what I had to do today, and I would try and get through the things I had to do. Now, with time, what happened was my clients taught me to pay attention. Now, when I say they taught me, what I mean by that was they would do things that would make it quite clear that they were not happy. Okay, they were not happy, and if I didn't catch it the first time, they would up the behavior. Right? So one of the things you'll find in learning disability is they call challenging behavior. Now, often challenging behavior is completely mistitled. What it is the person who's caring for that individual isn't paying attention. And the person has got so frustrated, so annoyed, so overwhelmed that then they do something which is explosive or to the carer is challenging. Okay? So my advice to you, if you're working with that client group, is always slow down and get very, very good at watching non-verbal communication, and you will quickly discover that you are in a conversation. It's not the type of conversation you ever had before, because there's no words. You may be speaking to them, but they're not speaking to you. But you're definitely having a negotiation and a consultation, and things will go much smoother. You're gonna, by doing this as well, you're giving people the opportunity to make decisions and choices. So remember I said about, in the morning, if you are working with someone who has severe autism and they, you have pictures, and the pictures are one of cereal and one of fruit, and they get to choose what they want for breakfast. Now, that's not a massively difficult ask for a carer to do that, but you would be amazed at how many carers that I've worked with who will resist that because they think it's too much like hard work. Why should they do that? I have to get their breakfasts out and get on to making the beds. So cereal it is, because it makes my life easy. That is never person-centered. That is staff-centered. That is individual staff member-centered, okay? And that's not who you want to be when you're working with vulnerable people. You want to be thinking imaginatively, creatively at all times to say, what can I do to make sure this person is able to participate? And then you have to record the needs. So you have to make sure that in the records you have a copy of what the preferences are and what they like. You're going to make sure that you're working with other professionals so you can identify how best to meet the needs of these individuals, what their preferences are. Because some people have very strong preferences. You know, maybe it's a lady and all she wants is a female carer. She doesn't want to work with a male. She gets very, very upset with a male. I've had male clients who got very, very upset working with male carers. So, you know, it really, really depends. You're going to find that sometimes, you know, some clients you'll build a relationship with, and others you won't. And there's not an awful lot you can do about it, because again, it's about choice, it's about preference, and it's not that you are delivering this care to people like, you know, they should be grateful, because that's not how it works. They are still in there in whatever capacity, whether they're, you know, mental illness or whether, you know, there's dementia or whatever. They're in there and they're making choices about whether you're the sort of person they like. And if they don't, that's okay, because, you know, you can't be liked by everybody. Okay, so let's talk about well-being. What is it? And what kind of adds to it? Okay, so well-being is the totality of a set of factors, which when we take them together, ensure that a person has the optimal physical, psychological, spiritual, social, and cognitive health. Now, before, we used to think of health in a very narrow frame. It was basically not being ill. Okay, that was it. So as long as you didn't have some horrible disease, then you were healthy. Now we've changed it to well-being, and it's a much broader term. Okay, so someone may have a physical illness, but everything else is pretty cool. So, you know, they've got good social life, their thinking's okay, they're psychologically pretty robust, and they've got a spiritual connection with some type of higher being and with themselves. So when we're working with clients, we're always trying to work out, how are they on these 5 factors? And is there a part of it that they're lacking in? Is there something that maybe isn't quite so well balanced? And if so, what do we need to do, or what do I need to do in order to improve that situation? And why do they need it? Well, they need it because firstly, it's very much about their identity and their self-esteem. So when someone is feeling good, and their well-being, you know, is in balance, then their own idea of self is very positive, and they start to feel good about themselves. So self-esteem is really just that type of feeling that you have value, that you have worth, and that you add something to the world. And when people are vulnerable, especially our clients and patients, and they're in the most vulnerable state, their self-esteem often takes a bit of a dunt. So they start to think that maybe they don't really add anything to, you know, to the world. And we need to make sure that they understand that's not the case. So sometimes things can happen. So say someone again has had a car crash and they've had a head injury, and that's a massive change of who they are, how they feel about themselves. And we need to do work to enable them to bolster and boost up their sense of well-being. Their feelings, you know, we need to really just ask them, how do you feel? Are things okay? I see you look a little bit sad. Are you upset? Can I do anything? Would you like me to spend some time with you? Often connection is overlooked, especially in care work when we're rushing around with all the things we need to do. Here are our duties today. And often what our clients need the most is just some time to be with somebody and be quiet. Whether that's sitting watching TV, staring out the window, having a cup of tea, a lot of the time that can be the most beneficial. Again, the privacy. When people go into care homes or social care facilities, they suddenly can often find themselves sharing rooms with other people that they've never had to before. And even if they're in a private room, they're suddenly going from being in their own independent house to being in, a place where there's another 8 individuals, 8 people, and they have to go to shared meals. Now that's a massive change. So the capacity for them to be able to find some space to still maintain their separateness and their own sense of self can be incredibly important. And again, dignity. I've heard of cases when I was doing some research with carers, and it was a guy. He'd gone to see his mum and dad. They'd gone into the care home, and his dad was in tears, crying, and mum was sitting on the bed with no clothes on, and mum had severe dementia, and the carers had come in. She'd soiled herself, so they'd taken her clothes off and they just left her sitting there naked. And dad had never seen her like that, so he was devastated. Now, can you imagine how the son felt because of the complete lack of dignity that was afforded to mum and dad? So you don't want to be that person. You never want to forget that the people that you're caring for have loved ones, that they've had lives before, and that needs to be respected, protected, and treated, with the uttermost compassion. Because when I heard that story, I felt quite honestly quite sick. And you're going to support and you're going to encourage, and that means you are going to make sure that everybody who you're working for sees you as a little ray of sunshine, even on the days when you don't feel particularly sunny. Okay, you're allowed to show days that you're not so great, but really your job's there to be a bit of a coach. These people are in situations they didn't choose to have to go into a care home or a hospital. Nobody says, hey, today I vote to go and stay in a group home. Nobody signs up to that. So you've got to make sure that when you're there, you're supporting, you're encouraging, you're making sure that what you're doing is about making the value of that person's life better, the quality of their life better. And you're going to make sure you keep an eye on the spiritual, religious, and cultural beliefs. People have different religious festivals. People like different types of music. They connect with God in a variety of different ways. It might be different from how you do, but they need, and that's why in well-being, spiritual's in there, okay? Because our connection with something more than us is very, very important to, I'd say, the vast majority of people, even if they're not practicing any faith. Whether they find it in listening to music, whether they find it in dance, whether they find it in nature, there will be some mechanism by which they find that peace and calm that comes with spiritual connection. Okay, so how are we going to work in this person-centered way? So we need to understand the individual preferences, wishes, and needs, and we need to think about how we're going to put it into practice. and then how we're going to review it. So first of all, we've got to think about person-centered outcomes. So that's basically about going, okay, here's Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. Jones is she's got the early stages of dementia, but she really likes to cook chips. Now, we're all a bit concerned about her cooking chips because she tends to forget, and one of these days she might burn down her house because she's left the chip pan on and she's walked away and she's forgotten about it. And that's very common in community care for dementia. So we are person-centered. Mrs. Jones has the right to cook chips, and we want her to be independent. And, you know, we want her to participate. We want to give her the opportunity, but we've also got the risk. So we have to think about workarounds. What are we going to do? So maybe what we do in this case is we say, okay, let's get a grant, some money to invest in a timed deep fat fryer. Okay. And what we'll do is she can then put the chips in the deep fat fryer. And if she doesn't take the chips out of the deep fat fryer after a certain amount of time, it will turn itself off anyway. Okay. Now that's a person-centered planning outcome. Mrs. Jones wants to cook chips. Problem, there's a bit of risk she might burn down her house. Solution, we'll find a way that she can fry chips and she doesn't burn down her house. That's how creatively we have to think. And we also need to think about, okay, how are we involving them with their care? Does Mrs. Jones, you know, does she want to live on the first floor? Does she like that? Does she like that carer? Does she want to have a shower or a bath? We have to be able to have these conversations in order to find out what are the preferences, you know. Maybe Mrs. Jones has never had a shower in her life. Maybe she's only ever used the bath. So we're saying, okay, from now on, you know, Mrs. Jones, you're going to have to sit the shower with water bashing your head. And she's like, no, I'm 85. It's a bit, you know, this is a bit too new for me. So we have to think, okay, how can we get her to have a bath? What bath type of bath or bath and equipment does she need in order to still be able to have personal hygiene in the manner that she wants? Okay. Now, again, it's not perfect, lots of issues with funding, etc. But you see that the perspective is about trying as much as possible to help the person decide what they want. We're going to keep thinking about the well-being. So we've got our checklist. Is there anything, you know, do we think that this person's isolated? Is there social well-being? Is it out of kilter? In which case, you know, can we encourage them to be in some sort of social group? Therapeutic culture. When we're working, everybody within the place that we're working is going to be on board with not only the idea of the person-centered values, but that this idea of compassion, empathy, or making sure that what our aim is to, as much as possible, return this individual or support this individual to be independent. Okay, so it's not about let's put them in a therapeutic situation that they never, we never aim to let them return to the highest normality for them. Okay, we never let them return to the highest function. That's never what we're trying to achieve. We're always looking to make sure that they can get to the best that they can for themselves. What do they need in support? We don't want to give them too much because we don't want them to be dependent, but we don't want to give them too little that they end up being at risk. So again, we have to find out, because maybe somebody is absolutely adamant. What you find a lot of the time with elderly patients is they're adamant they don't need anybody. women in particular are really bad for this because they've cleaned their house all their life. And you know, they will get told, oh, you know, we can get someone in to help you clean. Oh, no, it's fine. And they'll be refusing. Now, the house is absolutely filthy because they're not capable of doing it anymore. But they don't want to cause any trouble. Didn't worry? It's no trouble. So they'll be saying, no, 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 don't fuss. It's all right. I'll manage. So at that point, you're kind of having to go, okay, we know objectively that this person needs help, and that we know that their dementia, their self-awareness is getting less. So you would assess to be able to find somewhere in the middle, that the person is being cared for whilst at the same time doesn't feel like their whole of their life is invaded. And they'll go back to their beliefs and values, you know. So we have to make sure that we've got some sort of sense of, you know, how do people feel. So, for example, women, you know, when they're in hospital, they're not really very keen on being near men. And it's because of a whole range of cultural, religious beliefs, and safety beliefs, but also it's because they feel vulnerable and they don't want to be there. So, you know, we have to respect that. Some women wouldn't care. Some men wouldn't care. Some men would care too. So we have to go, okay, in this situation, how do we feel about it? What does this person think about, you know, being in a mixed gender ward, and their physical needs? So how are we going to care for that? What are we going to do? What do they need? What do they need in terms of equipment? You know, do they want help feeding? Do they not want help feeding? Do they want, you know, a wheelchair? Do they want help with like equipment to be able to help them walk? What do they want? We have to ask. We have to be involved in a conversation with these people. And that's all about sharing the decisions. So we need to make sure that when the decisions at the end of this that are going to go into the care plan, that it's not just been, you know, what's easiest for us, or what funding is available, or what the new kind of policy is. It has to be something that we can quite hand on heart say that, yeah, even if we don't get this equipment because of the funding, we're going to ask for it anyway, because this is what the client has said that they want and we think is best. And all of that taken together is called person-centered planning. And what's it based on? Person-centered values. Okay, so all of our values underpin all of this. They're there in every single thing we do, so that our values are then looking at our outcomes, and then we plan how to achieve them. So how do we get there? Well, we've got to take a personal history. So we need to know now what's going on with this person. We have to have some sort of sense of who they are. Now, depending on the capacity of the individual, they can either tell you themselves, or we might have to do a bit of digging. So you may be having to go through medical notes. You know, when I worked in learning disability in the hospital, some of the patients I worked with had medical histories that went back decades, because that's they'd been in the hospital in care facilities all their life. So you had, you know, a very strange snapshot of a person purely through what people had written about them. So you have that. That's one source. You also have like the social information that you can get. So from people that know that individual, maybe it be work colleagues, maybe it be friends, people that are around them. We also have the family. So the family are very good at providing us with some information. So we're gathering it from a range of sources, and a lot of the time it depends to what extent is the individual able to communicate with us directly. How much are they able to tell us themselves? And if their capacity is not as high, then we need to be a bit more inventive about where we get this idea of how do we find out what their needs are, what their preferences are, and what are their particular outlooks that we need to be aware of. So the likes and don't likes, we need to know. Because if you have a client who comes in who is essentially needle phobic and you don't know this, and then what happens is they, start screaming because you have to give them an injection, then it's probably quite nice to know that before you bring that out, the needle, because maybe there's some other way that you can give the medication without it being in that form. So preferences, likes and don't likes are we want to know that. What are the goals and desired outcomes? What are we trying to achieve here? Okay, so it depends on each individual person. Are we looking to increase their mobility? If they've had an accident or they've had some sort of physical acute episode, are we trying to increase their mobility? Are we trying to increase their independent living skills? So do we want to help them, to support them learning how to go and do their own shopping? Do we want them to learn how to wash their own clothes? There's a whole range of desired goals or outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and some of them can be quite, they're like mini goals, but for that individual person can be quite, they can be really quite big. And it depends, are we in an acute setting? Is it something that's a short turnaround, or are we in a longer term situation? So I worked with a client, and really the whole care home, for his care package, it was very much about getting him to be able to do his shopping independently. That had been a big goal for them, because this gentleman had been in a locked ward in a learning disability hospital for years. So he'd never had to go shopping. He'd never been anywhere. So, you'll find when you go to work in some settings that some of your older residents have probably been in the old style facilities, which were basically really big wards with potentially 20, 25 patients on them. And they've been there from young children. So you may come across these. Speaking to others, okay? So speaking to other professionals, speaking to other people that are on shift, speaking to people that have been working with this person for a long time. Making sure that you're always checking. Is there anything changed? Is there anything you should know? Is there anything that, has come up that you're not aware of? And why are we doing it? Because we need to understand their beliefs and their preferences, because we're dealing with someone who is an individual. Okay, we cannot be person-centered if we assume that this person is like me. If you go in thinking, okay, I've got all of these things to do today, like make the beds, do the washing, get the tea down your neck, clear the table, right, off you go. If you have this regimented timetable in your head, and the other part is you just assume the person you're working with is like you, has all the same beliefs and preferences, then all you're going to have is a big mess. Because imagine if that happened to you. Imagine if one day you had to go to hospital because let's say your appendix broke, okay? And this is actually pretty common in acute hospitals. You go to the hospital and it's 6 o'clock in the morning So the cleaning staff are coming round. The nurses have just changed shift. You're being rudely awoken to take your medication. 7 o'clock, you're being shoved out the bed so that they can remake it and have your breakfast. You never get up at this time, so this is completely alien. And then you've got, like 4 hours doing nothing. You're not allowed to go anywhere. You've just got to sit there. You may be able to put the TV on, depends. And then people come, your family come, but they're not coming till the evening at a set time. Your meals come, you don't like the food because it's just standard and it's pretty horrible. And you're there, you're stuck. Now, you're only going to be there for a handful of days. But imagine if you were there for all of your life. And that's what happens in care and in long-term care. This is not about you providing something to these people as like giving this to them. This is you entering their life where they live. You're going to work. It just happens that you work in their home. And when you start to think about that, that begins to change the perspective, because this is really about you entering into their private space. And always be mindful of equality and inclusivity. If you keep nothing in your head from the last 3, modules, equality and inclusivity, if you keep that at the basis of everything you do, everything just comes from that root, okay? Because you're having to treat people with respect and you're having to help them participate. Why are we doing it? Because we want to promote independence, we want to promote autonomy, and we want to empower everyone that we work with. We want to make sure that they are able to be the designers in their own lives. It's not just about us, and them falling behind. Okay, so how are we going to review it? So feedback and iteration. Feedback and iteration is when we go and we have an idea and we go out, we try it. So say I say to Mrs. Jones, here's toast in the morning. And because I've read somewhere that Mrs. Jones likes toast, or I've read somewhere that the best practice is toast in the morning. And Mrs. Jones, what she does is she throws the toast in my face. Okay, she just throws it at me. Well, that's feedback. Okay, she's told me I don't want toast. She might not be able to verbally tell me, but she's given me feedback. I then go away and go, oh, okay, Mrs. Jones doesn't like toast. Okay, let's try cornflakes. That's iteration. Iteration is when we go into the loop and I do something different. Then I take it back to her. And this time her feedback is she eats the cornflakes. So what we have is this iterative process. It goes round and round where I try something, it gives me feedback, and then I modify. And we do it through observation and communication. So even though having toast thrown at me is probably not my ideal form of communication, maybe that's the only way Mrs. Jones can communicate. She doesn't know any other way, and she wants to make sure I get the message. And if I don't get the message, then the next time she's likely to throw the plate as well. Okay? I'm going to be making sure I'm aware of the physical conditions. So I need to be aware of the environment. I have to make sure that how that person has preferences suits their preferences. So, some clients I worked with, because when I worked in the wards, They could tolerate being, multiple people on a ward. They could sleep, four in a bedded room in bays, but other ones couldn't. They had to be in a single room because it caused them too much distress. So we have to be mindful of that. We have to be mindful about age. How is things changing for that person? What's happening in their body? That we need to be able to make sure that they're comfortable, that we're caring for them. Are they losing weight? Why are they losing weight? Okay, are they putting weight on? Why are they putting weight on? We have to be observant at all times because we're looking for patterns and we're looking for changes so that we can get really, really good at saying, okay, what does this person need? What are they showing me they like or what they don't like? And how can I meet that? What are their treatment needs and abilities? So, what is it they're looking for in the treatment relationship? How are you responding to that? So maybe, at some point you're using, I don't know, a behavioral chart and it's some sort of stickers to help somebody do basic tasks. But then maybe they don't like that anymore because they've got bored of it. So you have to be able to change what you're doing in terms of treatment. You have to change what you're doing in terms of interventions. And it's always about responding to their choices, their preferences, and their wishes. We need to make sure you need to make sure that everything that's going on between you and that client is a dialogue. So you're always offering options and then you are looking for responses. And sometimes the responses to your options will not be the ones that you want or expect. And, that's life. That doesn't matter whether you're working with someone you care for or whether it's someone in your home environment. That's how it is because people are different. You need to keep an eye that their social functioning is catered for. It's very, very common for people who are vulnerable to shut down, to close off. They don't spend as much time with either friends, with family, with their community, and what happens is they get depressed. And if someone gets depressed, what happens is their cognitive function reduces. So one of the biggest problems for early stage dementia is people become embarrassed because they can't remember names. So what happens is they don't want to go out in case they meet someone and they can't remember who they are. So they don't leave the house. And then because they don't leave the house, they become increasingly isolated, which means they become depressed and it spirals and increases the impact of the cognitive problems that they already have. And cultural needs, if someone comes from it, say like is Hindu and they have Diwali and they want to celebrate that and it's something that's very meaningful for them, then that's something to be able to provide. Some of the older people in Scotland, they like to listen to Scottish country dancing music, whatever it is, okay? Because people need to feel connected, and especially when they're feeling vulnerable, those types of anchors are very, very reassuring. They give that person a feeling that they're still in life, no matter how changed it is. And all of this is part of reflective practice. All of this is about you all the time in question with yourself. How can I change what I'm doing so it meets the needs of the people I care for? What can I do differently next time? When you're doing the feedback and iteration, that's part of that reflective practice cycle, making sure you're always asking yourself the important questions. Okay, so consent. Okay, so what is consent? Consent is basically when we say, yes, you can do that. So the most common one is at the end of, say you decide you want to sign up, I don't know, to get some PDF download about something. And at the end of it will say, do you agree to let us send marketing materials? That's consent, okay? In the healthcare, it's things like, do you agree to donate your organs if you are, if you die? Do you agree to take, have this surgery? So if you go into surgery, you're gonna sign a disclaimer form that says, yeah, you're consenting to this. One of the big problems we had during COVID was a lot of people said, I don't give my consent to be vaccinated. I don't want to be vaccinated. And then we had a whole mess about how do we deal with that issue. So when are we doing it? Well, medical treatment and examination for sure, okay? So if you're going to give anyone medication, if you're giving people injections, if you're going to be giving them any sort of physical exam, they will have to give consent. Now, if they have learning disabilities, there's a good chance that the prescribing physician has the power of consent because that person has been deemed incapable. The same with dementia. As we go up through the stages and they get more and more unwell, then it's quite possible that the prescribing doctor will be the person who has the ability to consent. Generally speaking, in these situations, if you're going to be doing these things, it's highly likely that consent has already been granted. Daily care planning, this is in a more minor way. Do you want to have a bath or a shower? Do you want to go to the day centre? Do you want me to help you in the bathroom? Okay, so you're constantly asking for consent, because imagine if you're unwell. An example, when I had my baby, and this was a very bad example of someone not asking for consent. I'd had my baby and I was in hospital, and I'd been very, very poorly. And this lady came in and I didn't have a clue who this lady was. And she said, sit down on the bed. And then she started to give me a massage. And I jumped up and went, get out. I had no idea who this person was, okay? She had in her head, she'd been sent to do this, that this was supposed to make me feel good. Now, the problem was she hadn't taken the time to, 1, introduce herself, 2, explain to me what she was going to do, and 3, ask me, did I want it? Did I want her to do that? So that's like the opposite of seeking consent, okay? And again, when you're doing anything from putting on someone's shoes to helping them into a bed to, helping them choose a shirt, you ask. It's the polite thing to do, okay? Activity choice. Do you want to do X? Do you want to do Y? Do you want to go to the park? Do you want to go to the beach? Do you want this care worker? Do you want that care worker? Some people will take strong dislikes to care workers and will be like, I don't want to have them as my worker or my key worker. What do you want to wear today? Do you want to wear your red jumper, your blue jumper? What do you want? What colour? Some people only want to wear boring sort of browns and blacks. Some people are like, give me the bright yellow jumper. And even if you're thinking, oh my Lord, this is terrible, they have the right. They have that. Food. what their preferences is. And again, thinking back to cultural differences and religious differences, food becomes incredibly important, because what we eat is often not, it's not just about the physical nutrition of it. Often is also a very emotional, spiritual connection. So we have to be mindful about, food choices. Fitness for work, is this person able to go to work? Are they able to give consent for that? Do they want to do that? Personal hygiene. If you're having to clean anyone, wash their hair, brush their teeth, put them in the bath, cut their toenails, anything like that, then you need to check. You need to ask, because it's definitely something that it's about invading a person's body if you do not ask. And accommodation, where they want to stay, who they want to stay with. Are they happy there? Do they feel safe there? Do they like the place? Okay, so what things affect it? So some people will struggle to give consent because they have mental ill health. They basically are, deemed to have difficulties in being able to say yes or no. So this is often an issue of medication, and psychiatrists have to deal with it a lot, because they may have a patient, a client who has particularly psychotic episodes. That means they've got things like schizophrenia, or they have hallucinations, delusions, and they don't want to take their medication. So they don't take their medication, and then they become unwell. And when they're actively unwell, then they lose the capacity to give consent. So when they lose the capacity to give consent, often what happens is then the psychiatrist will have to take over that right, and again they start the medication, and we go through that cycle again. Cognitive impairment. So if someone has had some sort of neurological issue, maybe it's been a head injury, maybe it's been a tumor, maybe they've had some sort of growth in the brain that's affected it, maybe, and more commonly it's to do with dementia. And then as that what will happen is that the person has to be assessed as to whether or not they have capacity. Can they be able, are they found to have the basic cognitive functions that mean they are able to understand enough what consent means. Physical illness. If somebody's in a coma, they clearly can't give consent. Okay, so when the treatment's happening, someone has to give consent, and often that is a guardian, a husband, a parent, a wife. It's going to be somebody who takes over that position in order to make those decisions. Learning disabilities, very, very commonly consent is an issue here. And again, what you have is, it can be a bit of a grey area. So in some situations, the individual is deemed to be unable to give consent, so for medical treatments, because they're not able to understand all of that, but they can still consent to things like, do you want to put your socks on? What colour pants do you want? Do you want to go to the park? So there's a different level of the decision making, and in their everyday life they can make those decisions, but they couldn't, for example, deal with the complexities of the funding they receive for their care. Okay, so that will be someone else takes over that role. Language barriers. If someone doesn't understand what's being said, it's very, very hard to give consent. So, you can't just suddenly go, okay, this is what we're going to do to your, like, let's say your child, and the person has no idea what you're saying. So again, we need to go back to How do we get over those barriers? What do we need to do? And age. You know, children have the right to be participants, but obviously a 4 or 5-year-old is unable to give consent. Okay, they haven't got a clue. So you can give them information. You know, you need to go to see the doctor. You need to go to get a special operation because you've got a sore tummy. But it will be mum or dad who's signing off for consent for the surgery to happen. As we get into the 12, 13, 14, that age range, it starts to get a bit more complicated because some teenagers, some young people are precocious. They're much more aware than, you know, others, but it's really only until when they get to 16, then they're given the right to consent. How can you gain consent? Okay, so I've got gain in inverted commas here because you're not gaining anything, okay? That's really the wrong way to think about it. What you're doing is you're negotiating with somebody to see if they want to give you consent. Okay, it's not about you kind of go, oh, how can I manipulate them into doing what I want? Your role, your duty is to give them as much information, as much support and encouragement to make healthy choices. Now, those healthy choices from that individual's perspective might not be the same as yours. But like, let's say that, you know, I don't know, 75% of the time they are. But that 25%, you know, they can be quite a problematic lot. And of that, though, there's probably probably a good proportion of them who really it's less to do with their giving you an outright no, but really you need to give the information in a way that reassures them. So that means you've got to be adaptable, you've got to be flexible, you've got to provide it in all the different ways that you can, the information. You've got to explain it in as many different ways as you can. Maybe you give examples, maybe you show them, give them video links, maybe you get them to speak to other people. But it's really about being adaptable and flexible because, again, you're meeting the person where they are. Using physical communication aids, you're giving guidance and help, access to information. Communication skills underpin everything. You're going to use your verbal, your non-verbal, written. You're going to be listening actively, so you know that you're paying attention, and you make sure it's inclusive. So it's not just you lecturing the person saying, this is really good for you. You really need to do this because this is what the best practice is. And you would be an idiot if you didn't. Now, that sounds pretty extreme, but that was previously kind of the level of some of the communication. It was very, very much a top-down type of process with the doctor or the nurse who had the power telling the patient, this is what you need to do. So it's about respect. And you've got to understand no. Okay, it's very interesting how many people do not understand the word no when it doesn't fit into what they want. Now, there's going to be cases that are more extreme. So say someone is a Jehovah's Witness and they don't believe in blood transfusion, and you know the hospital take them to court because they refuse the transfusion for their child, and they're doing it on religious grounds. That's extreme. Okay, you're not likely to find much of that in your practice. What you are likely to find is when you go to give a client a shirt that you've decided today is the shirt that's ironed and ready to wear, and they give you it back. And they're saying, no, I don't like that. They're not saying it, they're just showing you that. So you say, you give them it back. And they then hand you it back. And then you get into this tussle about who makes who do what. Now, here's the thing. If the client doesn't want to do something and they demonstrate it by whatever means that they have at their disposal, you have to respect that. It's not your job to make somebody fit into your agenda, timetable, how you see the world. Okay, so what if there's no consent? What if the person has said no? Well, in the more significant things, you've got to work out, is it a lack of understanding or is it really due to there being a lack of consent? If somebody doesn't really understand, and that can be really, really clear, that can be really, really common, that, all the doctors, all the medical staff, all the care staff, you're all talking and you're all going, yeah, blah, 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 and you've got really into your jargon and you're talking really fast and you're saying this is for the best, and the person hasn't understood any of it. They just see a lot of people who to them seem very, very powerful, telling them what they have to do, but they don't know why, and they're frightened, so they say no, because they don't know what's going on. So in that case, it's about time, it's about being relaxed, it's about, what is it concerning you? What do we need to explain? Let's do it. And often it's about doing it on a one-to-one, not sitting in a multidisciplinary meeting with the poor person who looks like they're terrified. But if it is genuine lack of consent and it's not a life-threatening situation, then you have to just go with that, because the person has the right to say no. So if the person does not want to have that injection or take that medication, and they're not a risk to themselves and they're not a risk to anyone else, and they're not going to die, then, you can't really force it. And that was the problem during COVID, because there was a lot of pressure for people to have for the vaccination, and the people who didn't want it were saying, you can't prove to me I'm going to die. Okay. So for the people who did want it, it was about protecting the whole of, the community and society. And for the people who didn't want it, it was for them exercising their right to not give consent. And it was a very messy situation as a result. Ask questions and concerns, provide the information, and just support the person, be with them, because often they're being asked to make decisions that for them are either scary or complicated, or they don't know what the implications are or what's likely to happen if they do either or. And give advice. If they say to you, well, what should I do? I wouldn't be saying to them, well, if I was you, I wouldn't say that. I'd say, well, I do know of this situation, this client or this patient who had this, and this is what happened. Or I think maybe it would be a good idea if you spoke to the doctor and you wrote down the questions you wanted. Or maybe you need to go and speak to, the social worker. So those sorts of giving advice is quite useful. It's not about saying to the person, if I was you, I would, okay? Because it's not you. And really that's kind of overstepping your boundary. Okay, promoting active participation. This is on you, okay? The onus is on you. That means you're the one that has to do the promoting. If you have a vulnerable client, a lot of the time they are either disinterested or they're frightened or they're reticent, and they're not going to be flexible enough to be able to think of ways to participate. It's going to have to be down to you to think about this. So you've got to work in a way that encourages participation by whatever means is possible for that individual. So again, with communication boards, symbols, voting methods, non-verbal communication, writing things down, anything that you can do that makes that bit of effort for that person, wherever they are in wherever part of their experience, to be able to give you something back. So I did a lot of work with young people doing participatory methods, which was about using things like, asking them what are the characteristics of a good healthcare worker, getting them to draw the pictures, and then they would sit and they would write the bubbles around the picture in order to come up with things that they liked or didn't like. They used coloured pebbles to be able to vote for certain things. Now, this is about being creative. Okay, so it's if the person has no communication or is struggling with communication, you need to think, how can I encourage that? How can I meet them there? Okay, so sometimes, for example, music for people with dementia can be a really useful way of having them participate in just connecting. So letting them be connected to their past, to their culture, to being human, and to that spirituality. That's participation. That's about well-being. That's about you having to go out and find what type of music this person likes. This is about you having to go and find out what their cultural background is, so that you can provide them with the best method to participate. Okay, that's unlikely to be in the case files. That's you having to be a bit of an investigator. And you got to remember, every individual has the right to live as independently as possible. They are an active partner in their care. They're not passive. They're not like, just sitting there having things done to them. They're not a dolly. This is a person who's in there, and even at the most disabled, chronically, significantly disabled individuals will communicate pain, distress. They don't like something. They will tell you by whatever means they can, and it's your job to listen and respond appropriately. Okay, so how are you going to make sure? You're going to work with individuals, and you're going to work with others, and you're going to be looking, again, this is about this multidisciplinary team idea, that you're having a whole network, a whole ecosystem. And not only that, but you're going to be looking at the whole person, all of their well-being needs. So it's not just little bits of it. And you're going to be looking to motivate this individual, because some people, they don't want to, they're not interested, they're so shut down that they don't see the point. Your job is to find the levers and the buttons that's going to bring that person out, whatever it is, severely autistic children or adults. Sometimes it's at the level of just sensory play, so they're looking at lights in bubble lamps, or they're touching materials, anything which is allowing that person to be able to engage with their environment and participate at whatever level they're at with where they are. And you're going to use things like behavioral change and incentives. So it can be, especially with children, if you do this, then you'll get this nice reward. When we do that, then this is the good thing that's going to happen. And that's very, very common. We all use that in everything we do. But we don't want to use it, in a way that is kind of demeaning. We don't want it to be, if you don't do it, you're going to be punished. Which was quite previously, if you don't do this, you'll be punished. Well, we don't do that anymore. So there'll be no raising hands. There'll be no slaps, kicks, bites, punches. There'll be no touching that is inappropriate. There'll be no grabbing clients or shoving or pushing or twisting. None of that is acceptable. None of it. And it has no place for anyone working with vulnerable people, or in fact with anybody. So we know when we talk about behavioral things now, we're really talking about positive motivation. We're not talking about punishment. And you've got to be adaptable in reaching consensus. So that means when you're trying to come to an agreement, you've got to be adaptable. And sometimes that just means that, you know, when they say no, you've got to suck it up and say, okay, we've got to do something else. Your mindset, how are we going to make sure that it's going to be implemented? You've got to go in with the mindset that you are empowering individuals to participate as independently as possible in everyday activities. That's about how you see the world. If you can get this into your head as the means that you do your job, the lens that through which you do everything, all of the other stuff is just techniques. It all becomes almost like something you'll do unthinkingly, because you'll be constantly adapting to the situation, responding to the situation. But it starts with having this mindset that your role is to make sure that everyone that you care for, come into contact with, you want them being as independent as possible. So they're an active partner. They're not, you know, a passive. You want to be thinking, because, hey, it's going to benefit their well-being, which is their health. And that is my duty of care to ensure that I am thinking about that and I'm aware of that. Why? Because of autonomy and self-esteem are so closely linked. When someone does not feel they are autonomous, that every choice is taken away from them, they are likely to be anxious, depressed, shut off, and their health will suffer, because that is a natural consequence of that. And you're going to have to be really conscious of barriers, things that come up that you'll see in the way that systems are designed, or the way that certain colleagues work, or even certain colleagues that you work with who do not follow these principles. Maybe they trained, I don't know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, who knows? Maybe they're just not a very nice person, okay? But they will be a barrier to you being the best, most professional carer that you can be. And you cannot allow that to happen, okay? Because it's not you that is the problem in that ecosystem, in that network. It's them. So don't allow those sorts of barriers to change your practice, because you're on, you know, the side of the angels when it comes to making sure that you're working in a person-centered way. Rightio. So, okay, we've got the assignments, and it's going to be another 2,500 word submission, and it's all about making sure you understand what the learning outcomes were. So these were the ones at the beginning. Understanding what person-centered approaches are, what they are, and used in health and social care. So we're going to talk about what does it mean, and what is it, what are the values that underpin it. So you're going to be talking about dignity and choice and privacy, independence, the rights that people have for equality, inclusion, diversity, all of these principles, values that underpin this way of working in a health and social care setting. And again, it's this idea that you're going to be starting as if you're in the eyes of that individual and your client, and you're looking out of their eyes. How do they experience the world? What would make their world better? What would make their experience of their world better? That's how you've got to see it. They're the focus, they're the core. And then you're gonna prove that you understand the ways of working. So what is it that was going to show that you're working in this way? You know, how are you going to demonstrate it? How are you going to demonstrate what the care planning is that's involved, the outcome measures, how that you involve the people that are around that individual to make sure you're getting the information that's going to be able to demonstrate you understand this person on all of these different levels. Establishing consent. What is it? How do we get it? Why are we not actually trying to get it? It's not about forcing something. It's about coming to a negotiated agreement that this person accepts these types of treatments or these types of interventions. And then what happens if we've got problems? What if someone doesn't give us consent? What's the next step? How do we make sure it's not just a lack of information and understanding? And we understand the importance of promoting active participation. How we're going to do it? What are the methods by which we do it? How do we make sure that we're checking that everybody that we're working with is actually being seen as an active participant and not just as a passive receiver? Okay, so these are some of the suggested readings that you can go and have a look at. They will, some of the books that they publish are quite theoretical. So what you're looking for when you look at these is go and find something that is really more of an overview. So I would say, yeah, the Roberts book and the Sanderson book, okay, would be good places to start because they'll give you a good overview. And that's it for just now. So I am going to let me just stop this if I can. Wait 2 seconds. My mouse has decided not to work, and that. Okay, and I'm here. Okay, so can you see me, folks? Hello, can anyone see me? Is anybody out there?